Since I made my breakdown on Lomachenko and ENN, I wanted to clarify the difference between my concept of N and what many people are referring to as the void. It's a lot of mistranslation on my part. And the void is basically the space between fighters. That's what DJ calls it. Mighty Mouse, who's a great analyst, great YouTuber, and an even greater fighter. The space between fighters is the void. However, when I say in, I'm talking about a specific point, a specific line, a specific threshold that is within the void. It's within the void, not the void itself. It is a specific place and a spot within the void. The reason why I highlight that specific point within the void is because once you cross that point, there's almost an obligatory response from that fighter. Not all fighters will constantly jab at you if you are in jabbing range. Sometimes they will even take a break if they are within range for offense, but they're kind of like on the not the outside of range, but in longer range. Let's say fighter A has a 72-inch reach and fighter B has a 67-inch reach, and fighter A is keeping fighter B at the end of his jab. So fighter A is the bigger, taller fighter, longer reach. I know reach is an actual arm length, but for the sake of conversation, let's pretend that it is. So that means fighter B is going to be getting hit with shots mostly at the edge of the void, kind of like at the precipice of what's in range and what's out of range. And that's what we'll use to describe the space between fighters in this conversation. We'll just use the word void because so many people are using it. And this, I think, is a good term. Some shots from fighter A will require the full 72-inch reach, and some shots will be a little bit shorter, like maybe only 70 inches or 68 inches shorter jabs and shorter crosses, whatever. But these jabs are coming out because fighter A wants them to come. Fighter A is relaxed and controlled because everything is on fighter's A terms. They're not forced or obliged to make any unnecessary moves. However, once fighter B gets inside of the void, and particularly once fighter B crosses a certain threshold, fighter B has now forced fighter A to respond, not just by throwing jabs because fighter B has more control over the void, but now fighter B has forced fighter A into responding, either by backing up, repositioning, countering the entry, or defending any possible attacks that fighter B is possibly throwing. And fighter B is in a position where fighter A can no longer stand at the longest part of the range and just jab all day. But once a certain part of the range gets compromised, and I guess that's the best way to put it, it's not about the space between them. It's about kind of what happens when a specific fraction, a specific ratio of that space gets compromised and it gets invaded. A certain portion of the range is compromised, and the taller fighter or the fighter who's trying to control the distance in that way is forced to respond. It's not just range, it's not just the space between them, it's not just the void, it's a part of the void that forces and obliges response and reactiveness. It is a part of the void, and it's probably the most important part of the void, but it's not the space itself. It is a line or a threshold within the space, particularly that line which obliges a reaction once someone crosses that line, or once someone crosses into the void enough, closes enough distance, so on and so forth. They get inside of your reach to the point where you have no choice but to respond in one way or another. That threshold, that bubble, that line, that is in Fight Scientist. Usyk versus Fury coming very soon. We're gonna do a couple of breakdowns and get that prediction out. I will see y'all later, Fight Scientists. I'm out.